Making movies is no easy task. That's why you want to be able to work with people you like on a film that rolls merrily along without any drama or intrigue along the way. This video is not about those kinds of movies. No, here I want to take a look at some of the most toxic productions so far. The drama could come from anywhere, but in all of these cases, what was going on behind the scenes was as worth the movie as what was going on the screen. The Blade franchise deserves a decent amount of respect. The first Blade movie, starring Wesley Snipes as the titular vampire hunter, was released in 1998 and showed that you could do a successful R-rated superhero movie. More importantly, it helped prop up Marvel at a time when it was in desperate need of cash, having just emerged from bankruptcy the year prior. It didn't get great reviews, but it did do the job that it needed to do. Blade Trinity was released in 2004. It was written by David S. Aguirre, who had written all three movies and was the first Blade movie he directed. Stephen Norrington and Guillermo del Toro directed the first two respectively. Wesley Snipes reprised his role as the vampire hunter, and the film added Ryan Reynolds and Jessica Biel to the mix. But I remember the movie because I recalled the Sci-Fi Channel showing Triple H during previews, and as a fan of WWE, that sold me. Alas, this was not a smooth production. The main issue ended up being a serious conflict between Wesley Snipes and David Aguirre. Snipes wasn't happy with the script and adapted a Marlon Brando-like demeanor. He would refuse to come out of his trailer, communicating only via written notes, which led to chaos on the set. Apparently, his refusal extended as far as to not wanting to open his eyes for a scene. According to Aguirre, quote, "The other thing that happened in this scene is that Blade opened his eyes, and on the day, Wesley did not open his eyes," end quote. And so they had to CGI his eyes open. The cold attitude extended to the rest of the cast, including Ryan Reynolds as well, though the two were obviously able to patch it up as Snipes later appeared in Deadpool and Wolverine. It also didn't end with the completion of the movie. After the production wrapped, Snipes would sue New Line Cinema and Aguirre, claiming that they didn't pay him what he was owed and that, despite being a producer on the film, he was left out of the decision-making process. He also claimed that his screen time had been reduced in favor of Reynolds and Biel. Little wonder that, of the production, Aguirre said, quote, "That was the most personally and professionally difficult and painful thing I've ever been through," end quote. Despite the issues as well as terrible critical reviews, the film made $132 million on a $65 million budget. Not particularly great, but considering ancillary revenue, it probably eked out a profit in the end. Snipes himself would soon hit a rough patch thanks to a failure to file income taxes. Marvel has been trying to get another Blade movie made, though every time it seems close, it ends up getting pushed for one reason or another. Eventually, perhaps. The volatile relationship between Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski is legendary. I could have chosen any of their films together for this video, but there's no better place to start than the beginning. The first movie that the two worked on was 1972's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, one of the all-time great films. It's a surreal epic following a Spanish conquistador's descent into madness during an expedition to find El Dorado. It starred Kinski as the madman. This proved to be a prescient choice, and Kinski was, in fact, mad. Then again, so was Herzog. After all, he cast Kinski knowing what kind of person he was. See, this was not the first time that the two met. In fact, Herzog and Kinski met when the latter was renting a room in the same boarding house that Herzog and his family lived in. Herzog said the time that Kinski spent there was hell. In his words, quote, "We lived in the same large flat for close to 3 months, and, of course, from day one he terrorized everyone," end quote. He continued, saying, quote, "I think I was the only one who was not frightened because he was like a tornado passing into this apartment and destroying it within the first 48 hours in a fit of rage and destroying the entire furniture and the bathroom," end quote. So, you have two insane, intense guys. That's already a recipe for disaster. Now put them into a location that always ratchets up the issues, the jungle. This was years before William Friedkin did Sorcerer or Coppola did Apocalypse Now. Still, the jungle has always been inhospitable. The production was notorious for Herzog's demanding, often reckless directorial approach and the harsh conditions on the cast and the crew. They shot the movie on location in the Peruvian rainforest, in the Amazon, and at Machu Picchu over 5 weeks. In addition to Herzog continually pushing Kinski to dangerous extremes, the production had minimal safety, meaning actors and crews were exposed to the elements and hazards that are part and parcel of the jungle. They had to carry all the equipment over mountains and on rafts when moving between locations, and along the way they had to trudge through mud, deal with flooding, disease, and more. Kinski himself was a natural disaster. In one instance, angered by noises from a hut some crew members were enjoying themselves in, Kinski fired 3 shots in their direction. One of them blew the tip of a finger off of an extra. Later, when Kinski tried to leave the movie, Herzog told him, quote, "If you leave the set now, you will reach the next bend of the river, and I will shoot you. We'll have 8 bullets through your head, and the last one is going to be for me," end quote. This morphed into Herzog holding him at gunpoint over the years, but it was just a threat, really. Does that make it any better? Well, they kept working together after this, so you be the judge. For Herzog, artistic greatness seems to require real human suffering. If that's the case, this truly is a great movie. It's hailed as one of the best films ever made, and shows that you can make an epic film without an epic budget. William Friedkin's 1977 masterwork, Sorcerer, is a film that I've talked about before, but it's worth mentioning again considering it often flies under the radar. An adaptation of the French film The Wages of Fear is about 4 men who end up transporting unstable explosives in the jungle. Why must they do such a task? Well, suffice it to say that prior to their life in the jungle, their lives had gone awry. Prior to this, Friedkin had made The French Connection and The Exorcist, both landmark films that were critically and commercially successful. His peers were making great movies too, like The Godfather, Paper Moon, Jaws, All the President's Men, among others. What Friedkin didn't know was that Sorcerer would be a turning point for him. Nothing went right on this movie. First, he had a budget of $2.5 million for Sorcerer. Suffice it to say that he did not stay within those bounds. The final budget was a whopping $22 million. He went 9 times over budget. To put that in perspective, Star Wars, which came out in May 1977, a month before Sorcerer, had a budget of $11 million. Alas, Friedkin wanted to make a groundbreaking thriller film. To do that, he needed to go above and beyond. In this case, that meant going through hell. The production became legendary for its grueling and frankly dangerous filming conditions. To add to that, Friedkin was a perfectionist. On The Exorcist and The French Connection, he'd shown that he was willing to put cast and crew in harm's way. That was the same case here. The movie was filmed in the jungle in the Dominican Republic. That meant dealing with a severe lack of infrastructure, which needed to be built from scratch, as well as, again, all the unexpected and unwanted visitors that you meet in the jungle. Friedkin, who had lost 50 pounds and contracted malaria, said that, quote, "almost half the crew went into hospitals or had to be sent home," end quote. There's a scene in the movie where 2 trucks need to cross a bridge. It's a harrowing sequence in full, one of the best ever filmed, and it was harrowing to get in real life. The full scene took 3 months and $3 million alone because Mother Nature refused to cooperate. Friedkin had the bridge built, then broken down because of a drought. He then had production designer John Box go to Mexico to find another location to film in. Then he had the bridge rebuilt there. Then that river was also struck by a drought. They couldn't move it again, so they tried to make it work. Then they had to redo the scene multiple times because the trucks invariably kept tipping into the water. It's no wonder that Roy Scheider, one of the eventual leads, was the man who was cast because he said yes, not necessarily because Friedkin wanted him. A lot of others, like Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood, and Robert Mitchum, wisely said no to the movie. The movie was crushed by critics and at the box office. The aforementioned Star Wars sucked up all the oxygen. Sorcerer made a paltry $9 million and was derided by critics. Of it, Gary Arnold at the Washington Post, noting Friedkin's reputation, wrote, quote, "Both The French Connection and The Exorcist gave Friedkin a reputation as a talented manipulator, but it appears that he may have begun to overestimate the appeal of manipulation for its own sake," end quote. It has been reassessed since. Sorcerer is, frankly, a great movie, one that I highly recommend. It's a genuine thriller with some fantastic explosions and fireballs to boot. It didn't get its due at the time, but all's well that ends well. Despite this ostensibly being about gangs of New York, you could probably replace it with almost any movie that Harvey Weinstein worked on. There's a reason that people called him Harvey Scissorhands. He would force himself onto a movie and try to edit it to suit more commercial tastes. No one was safe from Harvey, not even Martin Scorsese. 2002's Gangs of New York is Scorsese's epic that starred Leonardo DiCaprio and Daniel Day-Lewis. While DiCaprio was the protagonist of the film, it was Day-Lewis that ended up stealing the show as Bill the Butcher. Adapted from a 1927 novel, Scorsese had been developing the project for around 2 decades but couldn't get the funding until Miramax acquired it in the late 90s. By the time that filming began in December of 2000, Scorsese was already a legend and Weinstein had initially agreed to stay out of the director's way. That isn't how it turned out, of course. Scorsese and Weinstein would clash all throughout production and post-production. Laura Holson, in a 2002 article for the New York Times, wrote, quote, "But the making of that movie, Gangs of New York, has turned into an epic of its own. Stars like Robert De Niro and Willem Dafoe have come and gone. Costs have overshot the original budget by about 25% to soar above $100 million. Mr. Weinstein has fought for a streamlined, more commercial version. All the while, Mr. Scorsese has tried to stick to his artistic guns as the two have battled over taste and length," end quote. It was the most expensive movie that Miramax had done at that point, so I could understand why Weinstein wanted to be involved. Scorsese was also a perfectionist though. He'd been working on the movie for so long and had been in the business long enough that he was able to get his way. It's part of the reason that no one else wanted to do the movie. After Scorsese turned in a 3-hour and 40-minute long cut, Weinstein demanded cuts to the movie, which he eventually got. The final movie ran 2 hours and 48 minutes. A 2023 GQ article by Zach Baron said that the movie, quote, was in part poisoned by its producer, Harvey Weinstein, with whom Scorsese wrestled over the length and the budget of the film. I realized that I couldn't work if I had to make films that way ever again, Scorsese said. If that was the only way that I was able to be allowed to make films, then I'd have to stop, because the results weren't satisfying. It was at times extremely difficult, and I wouldn't survive it. It'd be dead. And so I decided it was over, really, end quote. Thankfully, he in fact did not end up retiring. The movie doubled its budget at the box office and got solid reviews as well as 10 Oscar nominations. This is what Weinstein actually wanted, awards. But out of 10, it won 0 thanks to Weinstein himself. By this point, though people in Hollywood would work with him, no one particularly liked him, nor did they like how he pursued Oscars so aggressively. So they denied him the one thing that he really wanted. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, released in 1962, is a psychological thriller directed by Robert Aldrich. It starred Bette Davis and Joan Crawford once the drama and toxicity begins. See, Crawford and Davis were not fans of each other. Perhaps that's too milquetoast a descriptor though. Rather, this was the culmination of a multi-decade rivalry between the two. Think of it like this. Think of someone in your life that you don't like. Think about how long you've known them. Now think about hating them for decades, being forced to work with them, and continuing to hate them until death do you apart. Now you have an idea of the rivalry between the two. Harper's put together a timeline of the rivalry, but it began when, in 1933, the same day that Davis got her name above the title on X-Lady, Crawford announced her divorce from Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Davis's role was relegated to a small paragraph, while Crawford, who'd been in Hollywood for a while at that point, got the bulk of the attention. Then, in 1935, Crawford married Franchot Tone, a man that Davis had starred with in Dangerous and was in love with. In 1987, Davis said that, quote, "I have never forgiven her for that and never will," unquote. Meanwhile, in her autobiography, Crawford said Tone, quote, "thought Betty was a good actress, but he never thought of her as a woman," end quote. And it was basically a back and forth between the two every few years. In 1936, Crawford insulted Davis's dress at the Oscars. In 1943, Crawford tried to send Davis gifts to make peace, but all were returned. In 1945, Crawford takes a role that Davis turned down and wins an Oscar, and on and on. It all reached the apex on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which starred Davis as Baby Jane Hudson, an abusive former vaudeville star opposite Joan Crawford as her paralyzed sister Blanche. In Emma Dibdin's fantastic article about the rivalry, she writes, quote, "Crawford was on Pepsi's board of directors at the time, so Davis had a Coke machine installed in her dressing room just to spite her. In one scene where Jane beats Crawford's character, Blanche, Crawford requested a body double because she didn't trust Davis not to hurt her for real. She was reportedly proved right during a close-up in which a body double could not be used, where Davis hit her hard in the head. Some reports claimed hard enough to require stitches, though Davis insisted that she barely touched her," end quote. Then, quote, "Crawford got her payback during the filming of another scene where Jane drags Blanche out of bed and across the room. Knowing that Davis had back problems, Crawford made herself as heavy as possible, either by filling her pockets with rocks, wearing a weightlifter's belt, or simply making herself dead weight, depending on which report you believe, and deliberately ruined several takes, forcing Davis to drag her around again and again until she was in agony," end quote. The movie was a critical and commercial success. That usually makes enemies friends, but not here. Even when Davis was nominated for an Oscar for the movie, Crawford campaigned against her. This was next-level haterism, a kind that most of us can only aspire to. When Crawford died, Davis reportedly said, quote, "You should never say bad things about the dead, you should only say good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good," end quote. Maybe it's apocryphal, but in this case, I can believe it. Frank Oz is, to put it mildly, a Renaissance man. If all he was known for was his involvement with Jim Henson and the Muppets and Sesame Street, he would be a legend. But on top of that, he also voiced and puppeteered Yoda, undoubtedly one of the most memorable film characters of the 20th century. As if that wasn't enough, it turns out that he's also one hell of a writer and director, having done The Dark Crystal, The Muppets Take Manhattan, Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Bowfinger, and more. Some people are wickedly talented, and Frank Oz is one of those people. But even someone as great as Frank Oz can meet his match. His match came in the form of one of the finest and hardest to work with stars of the 20th century, Marlon Brando. 2001's The Score was a heist film that starred Robert De Niro and Marlon Brando. Both, of course, had played Vito Corleone, but hadn't worked together prior. It was also the last film that Brando did. The production was plagued with difficulties thanks to its strong personalities. Not just Frank Oz, who wasn't one to be trifled with, but of course Brando, De Niro, and Edward Norton, a perfectionist in his own right. The main battle, though, was between Oz and Brando. Brando did not take it well whenever Oz, as the director, tried to direct him. He called him Miss Piggy, and according to a Guardian article from 2001 said, quote, "I bet you wish I was a puppet so you could stick your hand up my ass and make me do what you want," end quote. It got to the point where Brando simply refused to come to set if Oz was there. Says the same Guardian article, quote, "Later Brando refused to go to set if Oz was present. Co-star Robert De Niro, who stars as an aging thief ready to retire, was called upon to direct Brando with Oz watching the action on a monitor and passing instructions to De Niro through an assistant director," end quote. Not that De Niro made life any easier for Oz. He was lukewarm about the project from the jump, while Edward Norton, as he did on American History X, took it beyond acting and started revising the script. Oz later blamed himself for the tension on set, though considering Brando's troubled history with multiple directors, I think he's being too hard on himself. If producers hoped that the De Niro-Brando gimmick would have people knocking down doors, they were mistaken. The movie did solid with critics and seemed to do alright at the box office, but did not post Godfather kinds of numbers or reviews. It is, without a doubt, one of the movies of all time. 1975's The Eiger Sanction is a spy action thriller that was directed by and starred Clint Eastwood. In it, Eastwood plays an art history professor that's also a mountain climber that was also, at one point, a government assassin who gets roped back into the game. As part of the plan, he has to climb up the north face of the Eiger in the Swiss Alps. Alas, this is one of those productions that ended in tragedy. The production would gain notoriety for the genuinely dangerous working conditions on the Swiss Alps, where cast and crew filmed at extreme altitudes in perilous environments. Eastwood had total control of the production and was adamant that not only would they shoot on location, but that he would do climbing himself. The decision was met with disdain by others that worked on the movie. Eastwood wasn't exactly a professional climber, and the Eiger was a dangerous climb, having claimed dozens of lives over the decades. Frank Stanley, who had worked with Eastwood as a cinematographer on 3 films prior, was against them doing the climbs as they posed an unnecessary risk. But in Eastwood's words, quote, "The challenge of it for me was to actually shoot a mountain-type film on a mountain, not on sets. The only ones done in the past were all done on sets, the mountains were all papier-mâché mountains," end quote. During one of the climbs, Stanley suffered a fall and was stuck in a wheelchair. He blamed Eastwood, saying he was, quote, "a very impatient man who doesn't really plan his pictures or do any homework. He figures he can go right in and sail through these things," end quote. The two would never work again after this film. But the worst of it was what happened to 26-year-old climber David Knowles. One day, the team was filming a rock slide sequence. After they wrapped, mountaineer and cinematographer Mike Hoover remembered that they needed a POV shot. He and Knowles rappelled down to a ledge in order to get the shot that they needed. After they finished, and as they were preparing to leave, a boulder had broken free of the mountain and smashed into them. Knowles was killed while Hoover suffered a broken pelvis. Eastwood considered cancelling the production then and there, but the rest of the climbers supposedly convinced him to continue. Over the course of 5 weeks, they would do even more difficult stunts before finally wrapping. The end result was a competently made film with some beautiful scenes. Unfortunately, the beauty belies a tragedy. Everyone in it was, at all times, at serious risk of injury or worse. While a technically impressive achievement, it came at great cost. 1989's The Abyss, directed by James Cameron, was, to put it mildly, hell for everyone involved. It was so bad they called it The Abuse. The movie cemented Cameron's reputation as a hard-driving director who would risk himself and others to get the right shot. In it, an oil platform crew needs to help the military get to a submarine before the Soviets do. While down there, they encounter some odd things. The film was shot in an abandoned nuclear reactor, and the cast and crew spent a lot of time underwater. Everyone except Cameron had a safety diver. By this point, he had already had plenty of experience underwater. He also had some special equipment, ankle weights and a heavy helmet to help him walk underwater. He also had a tank with 1 hour and 15 minutes of oxygen, as well as an assistant director whose job was to look at the levels. One day, the AD forgot his job. Cameron, 40 feet deep with no lights, took a breath of air and got no air. Through his helmet's mic, he tried to get to Al Giddings, his underwater cinematographer, but Giddings was pretty much deaf in both ears. He popped off his helmet and buoyancy vest and started to climb. He was part of the way there when his safety diver noticed and went over to help. Alas, they made it worse. The diver gave him his safety regulator, but it was broken. Instead of getting air, Cameron got water. He thought that he had screwed up, and so he did it again and got more water. He was choking, and, thinking that he was panicking, because he was, the safety diver tried to restrain him. Cameron punched the guy and made it to the surface, where he fired the diver and his AD. Cameron survived, no doubt to the annoyance of his crew. His leads, Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, also broke down. It's not hard to understand why. They worked 6 days a week, 70-hour work weeks, mostly spent underwater. Ed Harris would break down crying by his lonesome in his car one day, while Mastrantonio would reasonably explode after one scene. It's where she's being slapped repeatedly by Harris while soaking wet, and just when they think that they've got a good take, it turns out that the camera had run out of film. She refused to do another take. And according to Michael Bean, one day, quote, "Suddenly the lights went out. It was so black I couldn't see my hand. I couldn't surface. I realized I might not get out of there," end quote. Even Cameron would later say, quote, "I knew this was going to be a hard shoot, but even I had no idea just how hard. I don't ever want to go through this again," end quote. He would later go through all of this again on Titanic. Making movies is a stressful endeavor. A lot of money is at stake, and sometimes so are people's lives. Not every movie can have a smooth go of it, and it's oftentimes not in one person's hands. There are just too many people involved and too many factors involved. There will invariably be some drama. The best that a director can hope for in that case is to keep the toxicity low. Easier said than done though.